the rot runs really deep, and that rot stems from Islam itself. The left has its love affair with Islam, so they don't care for our stories much. Justifying slavery, including sex slavery. It's no surprise why this country is getting more and more unsafe for women and girls to just walk home at night.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest, and first time I've spoken to this lady, and she will be amazing, and you will not be disappointed with this one. It's Nuriyah Khan. How you doing, Nuriyah?
I'm very well, Nick. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're more than welcome. I've given you a big introduction there, so there's a lot to live up to there.
I hope I do it justice.
I came across you a couple of weeks ago. That's why I reached out and said, would you like to come on my podcast? And I'd not heard of you before. I've never seen any of your videos up to 2 weeks ago. And it's for some reason, it popped up on my timeline. And I caught a bit of it and carried on watching it. And I thought, how have I not heard of this young lady? How is she not all over the place? Why is she not the voice of reason we need to hear when we're talking about some of the social issues we've got in our country, especially around immigration, especially around assimilation, integration, and especially around the Pakistani community, which is all in the news at the moment for the wrong reasons because of the grooming gang scandal, which has now been admitted. Not only does that exist, not only is it predominantly Muslim men or Muslim men of Pakistani heritage, but they've also admitted now there was a political cover-up of it. So they're the sort of things you talk about. So the first thing I wanted to ask was, who are you and how did you get where you are now? So what is your story?
Yeah, sure. I will try and answer that as concisely as possible. But to kind of give you some context, I'm London born and bred, third generation British Pakistani. So the general kind of family upbringing I was brought up into was typical of, I think, a lot of, moderate to conservative. I know you hate the term British Pakistani, but for lack of a better word, kind of families in the UK. And I guess what differentiates me is the fact that for a lot of my adolescence, I grew up between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as well. And I did a lot of traveling around Southeast Asia as well. But because I went to school and I was surrounded by such kind of, people from all over the world, different nationalities, I went to an international school. It kind of really changed my outlook from who I was here when I was growing up in London. And here I was going down the quite, strict religious roots. So I started to wear hijab at a very young age, 9 years old to be exact. I would attend mosque classes every day after school. It was given as much importance and credence as actual school was. And I was very almost like proud of my Muslim identity, so to speak. And then moving to actual Muslim theocratic countries. Well, I moved to Saudi Arabia first. Dubai was obviously a lot more lax afterwards, but it made me really tone down my own religiosity, if that makes sense, because I was surrounded by it anyway. And we used to go to pilgrimage to Mecca every couple of weeks. And, you felt very blessed to be living in the house of God, according to Islam. But I would also see quite Wahhabist intense elements of Islam at play as well. So I would hear about amputations and beheadings. By the time I was there, we had the religious police as well. So to cut a very, very long story short, all my years within the Middle East, and then eventually getting married there as well, and then trying to get out of a abusive marriage, dealing with Sharia. I eventually came back to the UK, managed to escape, and for the first time actually looked into my religion personally as an adult without any kind of other direction or misdirection from anybody else about what it is and what it says. And I officially renounced Islam. And I think that's kind of what makes me a bit of an anomaly, because there's not many outspoken British Pakistani ex-Muslims, here in the UK scene, and we're kind of ostracized whichever way we go. So mainstream media doesn't want to touch us with a barge pole. for some reason, obviously the left has its love affair with Islam, so they don't care for our stories much. And, they think, oh, well, you're just gonna either be cannon fodder to the far right. And so you kind of like rendered in your own. That's probably why I got lost in the algorithm somewhere you'd never heard of me, is because we just kind of prod along doing our little bits of activism. Because I don't kind of make exceptions for culture or tradition. I actually say that the rot runs really deep, and that rot stems from Islam itself. And there's not many people who actually make that leap. There's a lot of kind of whitewashing and a lot of making excuses and explaining away the Islam side of things. And I think I try and cut right through that.
Which probably means at some level you're in danger because there's enough nutcases out there who see you as an apostate, and in Islam, apostates are murdered. Are you safe in the UK?
You would hope so. And I would like to think so, yes, but fundamentally, no, absolutely not. It just takes one nutter to, be a bit energized by what he's read in the Quran that day, or what one of the hadiths, so the sayings of the Prophet, say. Because as you rightly mentioned, Nick, it's like verbatim written in Islam that the one who changes their religion kill them. And therefore, all the Muslim countries that currently operate with Sharia, I would be tried for the death penalty in any of those countries. I think there's the 12 now, maybe 11 or 12. But yeah, I absolutely cannot set foot in those countries just by virtue of things that I've said online. Even going back to the UAE is completely out of the question. Like at the airport, you would get stopped and detained for a post you made on social media in a jurisdiction where it's completely legal to. But yeah, the UK, I hate to say it, but day by day, it's getting more and more unsafe for people like myself. Anybody that's vocal about the religion, it is quite a herd mentality of, and a mob mentality of we've got quite an Islamicized population in the UK who are quite extreme in their way of thinking. And yeah, you've just got to, I take a lot of precautions, but it's just not enough fear to make me stop doing what I'm doing.
I remember, I think it was one of the princes or one of the leaders from Saudi Arabia, or it might have been the Gulf states, is on YouTube and he's being interviewed, and he says radical Islam is a problem and it's going to come from the West because we've dealt with radical Islam in our country. Radical Islam is going to come for us again from the West. And he was blaming Western countries for enticing and for not dealing with radical Islam. You said then that you started researching your religion at that particular time, Islam. I'm presuming you probably picked up your phone and started Googling stuff because you're of that generation. Is that what you did? And what did you discover? And what was the shocks when you started? I would imagine, is this bit true? What about this? What does the Quran say on that? So the things you started getting back online, did any of it shock you?
Oh, absolutely. But funnily enough, because I had spent so many years in the Middle East, even when I had those kind of lurking doubts that would present themselves to me while I was growing up there, we have no access to the free internet. So you've got to go through VPN, and you can get in serious trouble if you're found to be using VPN and things like that and searching anything contrarian to Islam. So believe it or not, coming back to the UK and actually having the freedom to type the words, is Islam the truth? And having the internet give me a genuine response where, everything is visible, was so like, it was new to me. And obviously I'm very grateful that I did, because it took me down rabbit holes. And as you said, I was going deeper and deeper into, well, what does that say? But no, surely that can't be it. And if the Quran is saying that, maybe I can safeguard my religion because the Hadith will counteract it, and vice versa. But ultimately, Nick, it came down to, in Islam, the core belief is that the Quran is the eternal, timeless, infallible word of God. And if I'd found my issue within the Quran, then I don't really have anywhere to turn. As much as the cognitive dissonance wants you to, try and stay within the fold, I couldn't. I actually couldn't. And I was a kind of a brighter young adult by then. I had studied law at university. I knew what even a very vague verse in the Quran could mean in practical purposes, and what it did do to me, for example. So like only giving men the right to divorce and saying that a disobedient wife can be disciplined. All of these things can play out very like in a very dark manner when they are enacted in those countries. And I saw that firsthand, obviously, because of my personal experience. But yeah, that there was so many shocking things to the point where I still could not trust my own mind because Islam tells you that, oh, you've got to understand Arabic, or you've got to go to some imam or some sheikh or some scholar. And Arabic's not my first language or second language or third language. So I actually went onto YouTube and listened to a native Arabic speaker translate the Quran and see his interpretation of it. And when I did that, and I could see the direct links to how you can extrapolate terrorism and how ISIS and some of these terrorist organizations can directly say they were influenced by the Quran, I just could not look away after that. And that was kind of the point of no return for me. But it's actually very funny that you also mentioned that extremist Islam will come out of the West, because you're completely right. Even when I was living in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they would know how to crack down very well on their kind of internal elements or threats or extremist kind of factions. And they actually like look at the West as kind of in a very mocking way, as in a disparaging way as well, that we can kind of weed out and ban these organizations outright. And here you are displaying them all over TFL, for example. You know, Islamic Relief is one of them that has questionable um, funding and things like that. And we're blind to it here.
We are. Now, talking about the Quran, I reckon we could pick up any holy book and find parts of any holy book that we don't agree with today. We can do it with the Bible. The Bible was used as evidence to commit some major atrocities over the last 2,000 years. So we can do that with any book, any religious book. What was it about Islam and you reading and researching Islam that made you go, this isn't the religion for me?
It was so obviously there's in terms of like things that you can extrapolate from it, like I said, terrorism, child marriage, and then this constant like beratement of the infidel. And it's very much like a us versus them throughout the entire book and as a wider concept of Islam. So everything from, constantly cursing out the infidels, but beyond curses, it's to take action against them. And there's, prescriptions as to not to take Christians and Jews as your friends and then go out of your way to try and harm them or, delude them and things like that because in the wider picture, you're constantly at war with them. Their lands are not lands where Islam thrives. So they're in a state of Dar al-Harb, which is the house of war. And you need to bring them into the state of Islam, which is, according to Islam, the natural state of every human being. It's our natural disposition. So it's just got everything from justifying slavery, including sex slavery, and doing things to non-Muslim women, for example. And again, we can think of all the connections and how that plays out in society as well that we've seen. But yeah, it's very much like it's a manual for terror. It had extremely misogynistic elements to it and actual cause for sexual violence. And as I said, a wider kind of hatred towards the infidel, so that you can never, ever, I understand why it's impossible for most Muslims who follow that down to the T to assimilate and integrate, because everything about that says you are different, you are pure, you are clean. They are the worst of creatures and they are, eternally deluded. They were given the message, they corrupted it, and it's on you to kind of by force. As you know, there's the whole way that Islam was spread by the sword, but the whole idea is to convert them or subdue them, and essentially in a perfect Islamic state, have them pay jizya just to exist underneath your subjugation.
I've seen some videos online of Islamic scholars talking about how they fear the internet, how they think the internet and social media could potentially destroy Islam. And that's because all the information you need to know is online, regardless of the topic. The internet has been one of the wonders of the world, that now the whole knowledge of the world is in your pocket, in your phone. We've never we've never been in such a situation before. In the past, rich and powerful people always wanted to control information, because if they could control it, they can control you. The church did it. That's why our Bibles were all in Latin until the printing press and stuff like that. Do you think a reformation of Islam is coming? Do you think a modernization of Islam is going to come, driven by the internet?
I think in order to survive, it's going to need to reform itself in some way, shape, or form, because the speed at which, knowledge and actual sources of Islam are being put online and translated from Arabic, as you said, the same thing that happened with Latin, it's now accessible to the masses. And what they're seeing is that even in countries where there's no official figures, lots and lots of young Muslims are questioning, or they're just thinking that Islam is too outdated and it's not keeping up with modernity. And so questions are going to arise. And now these questions are being televised and YouTubeized and all of these things. So there's definitely a change. If it wants to survive as a religion, they are going to have to really try and catch up with modernity, because pure Islam in itself, I mean, you've seen like there's videos of the Taliban just recently breaking up instruments and saying this is a Western invention, yet they're filming it on their mobile phones and uploading it to more Western inventions like the internet. So it's it makes no sense, but that's how kind of regressive their teachings are. And um as you said, now it's like it is, it's a young thing. So I think it's up to the young people now to kind of decide for themselves how they view their Islam. And you're seeing a lot of people kind of make Islam their own. That's what I'm seeing, a lot of cultural Muslims who, they sometimes wear hijab and the next week they're out partying, and that's okay. They can rationalize it in their own mind, and each to their own. But I think as a religion itself, pure Islam is never capable of reform. So you're always going to have that kind of stagnant Islam, or the pure Islam, which is, going back to the ways of the Prophet, the kind of Salafist Islam wanting to maintain its control. But then, as you said, the internet is all powerful.
Yeah. Let's talk about the UK. Pakistani Muslims at the moment in UK have got a horrendous reputation, mainly down to the grooming gang scandal over decades and decades. And we don't have enough Pakistani Muslims or Pakistani people from the Pakistani community speaking out. They are becoming more insular. Part of that is down to immigration. We keep encouraging more immigration, which then allows people of Pakistani descent to live in their own little areas that don't need to integrate, because there's enough of them now not to integrate, and we're doing this to ourselves and to our country. But I'm fearful. I'm fearful of what's going to come in the next couple of years, and I'm fearful of mass violence. And unless we can get some of these communities to open up, to integrate better, to start calling out the poor members of their community, because we have rapists and paedophiles in all communities. I've had paedophiles arrested and prosecuted. They all turned out to be white. So this isn't just a Pakistani Muslim problem. But the Pakistani Muslim population in this country, I can count on one hand the people I know who call out wrongdoing. The rest of them close shop. It's like a clan mentality. We'll stick up for our clan regardless of what they've done wrong, because someone doing wrong in our clan is still better than those people outside our clan. And I think they're sowing the seeds for a horrendous time in the UK over the next few years if they don't change. Do you think the Pakistani community in the UK can change, can do better at integration, can do better at calling out the wrong uns in their society? Or am I just shouting against the wind?
Oh no, absolutely. I think it needs to happen. basically, I think it's their moral imperative to actually come out and differentiate themselves from these kind of perpetrators and say, no, as you said, there's good apples and bad apples in every society and in every culture, but the onus then falls on them to call out their own when they are found to be guilty of all of these crimes. And, I think at the moment, as I just like you, I can't really hear those voices. I can't see those voices around me. It's almost like a collective silence. And I know obviously it does stem from kind of their fears of being tarred with, as you said, the reputation is already kind of tarnished here, but there's this collective guilt and shame. And I think by acknowledging what's happened, they're going to be part of that. But they need to change the way that they look at this issue, because as with any issue, for example, when, the sexual abuse scandal of the Catholic Church came out, and good-hearted Catholics came out and stood against it and said, we need investigations. We need to get to, no child should have to go through this. And we need the same kind of.
It was Catholics who exposed it all.
Exactly. Yeah. We need that same kind of resolve from the British Pakistani community. And it saddens me to say, but when I spoke to Martin Daubney, I told him the same thing, that there's a very heavily internal policing culture that goes on within them, especially because many of these perpetrators are from one specific community. From Mirpur, they are even more clan-like and tight-knit as a group. And it's kind of they've got strict honor codes, and it's almost like the worst thing in the world to, rat on your neighbor, despite having done the kind of crimes that we're talking about when it comes to grooming young British white girls. They would rather die according to their honor code. But then the onus falls on the rest of us who are not from that, specific community itself, to say, well, we're also from that country, and hey, we completely, don't condone this behavior, and we would report anything if we were to find out. It's just, you need to show the rest of the country that you're on board with, the absolute disgust at what's happened. And I think it's seriously lacking at the minute.
Yeah. Are these the same type of people from the same area of Pakistan that if they felt their daughter was discrediting the family, they would murder her?
Yeah, absolutely. This region in particular, as I said, they have honor codes, very kind of tribal, clan-like. It's like a subculture within itself, but they are extremely patriarchal. And so it's the same kind of concepts as when you hear about honor. I call them dishonor killings. But those kind of things would go on in exactly the same culture there. And that's the problem, because we have already had waves of immigration from that area into Britain. But as we continue, this obviously isn't just confined to that region in Pakistan, it's across the wider Middle East and conservative Islamic countries. And when we keep allowing these swathes of migrant working age men into the country who also come from similar rural backgrounds that treat women like this or think about them like this, it's no surprise why this country is getting more and more unsafe for women and girls to just walk home at night.
Yeah, I mean, if they're quite willing to murder their own daughters, they're not going to think twice about respecting English girls living here, are they?
Exactly. And there's so much at play there between, I could murder my sister. It's acceptable if she posts a video on TikTok that I believe to be, too raunchy or too kind of out there. And in the same breath, it's because the English girl is not like my sister and she's wearing whatever she likes, that she can be approached in that way. And she is easy access for me. It's a very warped way of thinking, where the onus obviously lies on the girl herself and the way she presents.
Mm. We've got a lot of work to do in this country, haven't we, around integration, assimilation, and also understanding who we're allowing in the country, from what countries, from what parts, from what cultures, and what sort of traditions and opinions that these people have. The only way we're going to have this discussion is if the mainstream media start speaking to more people like you and like Candid with Lubna, and there's other people out there, who have left Islam, who have different opinions, because at the moment, all we get from mainstream media are the so-called community leaders who have never been elected, but they tell the media, I represent this community. Well, in this country, we don't have self-elected leaders. We have democratically elected leaders. And we keep hearing the wrong voices. We keep hearing the wrong people. We need to be hearing people like you, people who are born here, who see the UK as home and wants to live here forever and has the best interests of this country at heart. Why don't we see more of people like you on mainstream media? I'm sure you'd go on, but why aren't the mainstream media engaging you?
Oh, we absolutely don't fit their narrative, which is to bend over backwards and appease all kind of calls and cries of Islamophobia. So everything I've just said to you today, Nick, would be, you know,
Yeah, of course
have
it is.
be have be classed as extremely Islamophobic and bigoted.
You're also a racist as well, by the way, and a Nazi and a fascist.
Oh my gosh, yeah, badges of honors, I guess today in these days anyway. But yeah, absolutely. And as I said, they wouldn't want to touch us with a 10-foot pole because for all of those reasons. And I think this is well, we're at such a sad point in this country where, you know, typically you would think free society would allow for diverse opinions like this. And I'm somebody who's come from within the faith myself and within those kind of cultures myself, and I'm speaking out. Yet they're happy to sideline those stories because it doesn't fit in with their narrative or the kind of woke mind virus agenda that they'd like to keep beating on about. And so they'd rather sit there and talk to these, as you said, self-appointed community leaders who, by the way, where are they to kind of come out and show remorse over what's happened with the grooming gang cover-ups? I think I've seen maybe two max since the whole kind of investigation was opened up again, and one of them was in complete denial. And you know, it's again, there's just no representation there. You just don't hear. And there's hardly any women. The only women that go on those mainstream channels, they do my head in because they usually sit there and again, you know, a woman's free to wear what she wants, but to or they always get that same kind of archetype of a hijab wearing woman who calls out the other person on the panel for being everything you said that I was today, Nick. And it's beating that same drum, and it's kind of all this DI infused lingo that they use, and it's this victim complex, and we've got to safeguard and protect Islam at all costs. And this is rampant everywhere from university campuses to company organizations, and the mainstream media is just an extension of that.
I'm sure there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the the British Muslim community who are like you, who think like you, who want the same things as you, but they don't speak up because they never see someone like you on TV. Because all they see are the imams, the nutcases, the Islamic fundamentalists, and they go, I better keep quiet because my opinion isn't wanted. But if we could get more people like you on mainstream media, I'm sure the Muslim community in the UK would start the long journey of sorting themselves out. But it can't be done unless we get more moderate voices like yours on mainstream media, on the BBC, telling your story, having these conversations and challenging your own communities. Unless we have that, the tens of thousands of people like you will just remain silent. And that's such a shame.
I think that's why now independent media is so crucial, and conversations like we're having today, for example, you and I could never have kind of teamed up and had a conversation like this had these platforms not existed, and we would only continuously hear those voices. And who knows, I may never have had the guts to speak up. So it is really, really crucial that, you know, we all use our platforms to have these diverse conversations. And to be honest, because I um like portray myself as an ex-Muslim and I call out Islam directly, I feel like I have leverage to speak out against those communities because I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. They've discarded me, so they think, you know, I'm an apostate, I've gone off the rails, I'm a far right coconut. So sometimes I think it's more productive for, as like you said, people like Lubna, who's still within the faith, that, you know, maybe she can do some more legwork and kind of make them introspect and you know, dig deep. But I feel like the last thing I heard was they completely turned on her as well. So whereas I've distanced myself from that group, they don't even allow anyone within their own group unless they toe the line to speak out. And I think that's why I sleep more peacefully at night because I have separated myself and I kind of call a spade and I really don't care about the insults and jibes I get for it. But I've kind of separated myself and then I'm able to, with clarity, speak on the issues and say, it is their culture, it is this mentality, but it's also the religion. And those things like together are very complex and intertwined in a really chaotic way in the UK.
Nuriyah, thank you so much for coming on. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you and I'd love to do it again. So I'll keep in contact and hopefully in a month or two, come back on and let's continue this conversation. And like I said throughout this interview, we need you and we need people like you on mainstream media because if we don't, we're going to open the gates to hell in this country. We've only got a short amount of time to start fixing this country we all call home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and for all the work that you do.
Excellent. And anybody who wants to follow you, I'll put all your contact details in the description of the video. Please go to the description and please follow Nuriyah. You won't regret it. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Likewise. Thanks, Nick.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.